Hey everyone, welcome back to Globe MyS. Today, we're diving deep into 10 deaths that dramatically changed the course of human history. These weren't just tragic endings, they were moments that redirected politics, inspired revolutions, and reshaped entire civilizations. From the assassination of visionary leaders that triggered world wars, to the untimely deaths of geniuses whose absence slowed human progress, each story reminds us how one life can alter destiny itself. Some of these events will truly shock you and make you wonder, what if they had lived a little longer? So stay tuned till the end to uncover how these moments of loss became turning points for the world. And if you love learning about powerful moments that shaped history, don't forget to subscribe to Globe MyS, hit the notification bell, and join our growing community of curious minds.
The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914, was the spark that ignited the first global inferno of the 20th century. World War I. The Archduke, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, was on an official visit to Bosnia when a young nationalist named Gavrilo Princip stepped out from a crowd and fired two fatal shots. In a single moment, the hopes of a peaceful Europe collapsed. The streets of Sarajevo echoed with panic, and newspapers across the continent carried the shocking headline, "The Archduke is dead." Austria-Hungary, enraged, blamed Serbia. What followed was a domino effect of alliances and threats. Germany sided with Austria-Hungary. Russia defended Serbia, and within weeks, nearly every major European power was drawn into war. A single gunshot had set the entire world on fire. The impact of Franz Ferdinand's death went far beyond one nation's grief. Within weeks, Europe was consumed by World War I, a conflict unlike anything the world had ever seen. Trenches stretched for hundreds of miles. Machine guns and poison gas turned battlefields into graveyards, and more than 16 million people perished. Great emperors, the Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, Russian, and German, crumbled under the weight of destruction. Borders were redrawn, revolutions erupted, and new powers emerged from the ashes. Yet, the wounds of the war never fully healed. The harsh peace treaties and lingering resentment sowed the seeds for World War II, just 2 decades later. One assassination, one gunshot in Sarajevo, had set in motion a century of conflict, shaping the geopolitical world we live in today. The death of Genghis Khan in 1227 marked the end of one of history's most unstoppable forces. Under his rule, the Mongol Empire rose from the harsh steppes of Central Asia to dominate nearly half the known world, stretching from China to Eastern Europe. Genghis was not just a conqueror. He was a strategist, a unifier, and a visionary who transformed scattered nomadic tribes into the most powerful military machine of the Middle Ages. His campaigns toppled dynasties, reshaped trade routes, and spread fear across continents. Yet, behind his brutal legend was a disciplined leader who valued loyalty, merit, and law. When he died under mysterious circumstances during a campaign against the Western Shia, his generals and family concealed his death, fearing chaos. The man who had united the steppe under one banner was gone, but his shadow still loomed large over the world. After Genghis Khan's death, his vast empire, the largest contiguous land empire in history, was divided among his sons and grandsons. What began as a brilliant system of inheritance soon became a source of tension and fragmentation. His descendants, like Kublai Khan and Gadai, expanded the empire further, conquering China and creating the Yuan dynasty. But unity began to fade. The once mighty Mongol Empire splintered into rival Khanates. The Golden Horde in Russia, the Ilkhanate. In Persia, the Chagatai, Khanate in Central Asia, and the Yuan in China. Trade flourished along the Silk Road, yet political unity crumbled. The world Genghis, built with blood and vision, became divided by ambition and distance. His death did not end the Mongol legacy. It transformed it, spreading his influence across continents, but scattering the power that once made the Mongols unstoppable. The assassination of Julius Caesar on March 15, 44 BCE, became one of the most defining moments in world history. Once hailed as Rome's greatest general and reformer, Caesar had conquered Gaul, defeated Pompey, and risen to unmatched power. But his growing ambition and authority alarmed the Senate. Fearing that he sought to become a king, a group of conspirators led by Brutus and Cassius plotted his death in the name of saving the Republic. On that fateful day, Caesar entered the Senate House, unaware of the betrayal that awaited him. Surrounded by men he once called allies, he was struck 23 times, falling at the base of Pompey's statue. His final words, "Et tu, brute," echoed through history, a symbol of ultimate betrayal. With that single act, the Republic's fate was sealed, and the old order of Rome began to crumble. Caesar's death was meant to restore the Roman Republic, but instead, it unleashed years of civil war and paved the way for the Roman Empire. Rome plunged into chaos as his loyal followers, including Mark Antony and Octavian, later Augustus, sought revenge against the assassins. The dream of a free republic died in the bloodshed that followed. When the dust finally settled, Octavian emerged victorious, declaring himself the first emperor of Rome. The Senate, once the symbol of republican power, became a formality under imperial rule. The world that Caesar tried to reform was gone, replaced by an empire that would dominate for centuries. Ironically, in trying to prevent one man from becoming king, the conspirators created an eternal monarchy. The Ides of March didn't just end a life, it ended a system and gave birth to one of history's greatest empires. The sudden death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE marked the end of an era defined by ambition, conquest, and vision. At just 32 years old, Alexander had achieved what no general before him had even dared to imagine. From the rugged lands of Macedonia, he swept across Persia, Egypt,
and India, creating one of the largest empires the world had ever seen, stretching from Greece to the edges of Asia. Yet, even at the height of his glory, his relentless drive never ceased. He dreamed of pushing further east, exploring new lands, and uniting the world under a single culture. But fate had other plans. In the palace of Nebuchadnezzar II in Babylon, after days of fever and weakness, Alexander fell gravely ill. His commanders waited anxiously as the man they saw as invincible lay dying. When asked who should succeed him, legend says he whispered, "To the strongest." And with that, the conqueror's voice was silenced forever. Alexander's death created a power vacuum that shattered his once unified empire. With no clear heir, his top generals, the Diadochi, or successors, turned against one another in a brutal struggle for dominance. The empire splintered into rival kingdoms: Ptolemaic Egypt, Seleucid Persia, and Antigonid Macedonia. Though politically divided, Alexander's legacy endured through the spread of Greek culture, art, and philosophy, blending with Eastern traditions to create what historians call the Hellenistic era. Cities he founded became centers of learning and trade, and his vision of a connected world lived on for centuries. Yet, the unity he fought for dissolved in the chaos of ambition and greed. The man who sought to become a god had fallen, but his influence had only just begun to shape the course of civilization. The death of Vladimir Lenin in 1924 marked a turning point not only for Russia, but for the entire 20th century. As the mastermind behind the Bolshevik Revolution of 1917, he had overthrown the centuries-old rule of the Russian Tsars and founded the Soviet Union, the world's first communist state. For millions, he was seen as a revolutionary hero, a man who promised equality and a new social order. But behind the scenes, the nation he built was fragile, scarred by civil war, famine, and political chaos. When Lenin suffered a series of strokes, his once commanding presence faded. Confined to his home in Gorky, he watched his revolution begin to drift from his ideals. On January 21, 1924, Lenin died at the age of 53. His body was embalmed and placed in a glass tomb in Moscow as Red Square, becoming a symbol of both reverence and fear, the end of an era and the beginning of a darker one. Lenin's death left a power vacuum that would decide the fate of the Soviet Union and the world. Within the Communist Party, fierce rivalries erupted. At the center of it stood Joseph Stalin, the shrewd and ruthless party secretary who slowly consolidated power through manipulation and fear. Lenin had warned against Stalin's growing influence in his final letters, but his words came too late. By the late 1920s, Stalin had emerged as the unchallenged leader, transforming the Soviet Union into a totalitarian regime. His rule would industrialize the nation, but at an immense human cost: purges, forced labor, and famine. The dream of a classless utopia twisted into an empire of control and terror. Lenin's death had not only ended a revolution, it had birthed a dictatorship that would shape the course of global politics for the next century, defining the Cold War and the balance of power that followed.
The death of Joan of Arc in 1431 remains one of the most powerful and tragic moments in medieval history. Born a peasant girl in France, Joan claimed to have received divine visions commanding her to drive out the English and crown Charles VII as king. At just 17, she led French troops into battle, her courage and faith inspiring a nation on the brink of defeat. Under her banner, the French achieved miraculous victories, most famously lifting the siege of Orleans, which turned the tide of the 100 Years' War. But her rise to fame came with danger. Captured by Burgundian allies of England, Joan was handed over to the English and put on trial for heresy and witchcraft. After months of interrogation and manipulation, she was condemned. On May 30th, 1431, in Rouen, she was burned at the stake before a jeering crowd. Her final words were a prayer to God. Joan's execution was meant to silence her cause. Instead, it transformed her into a martyr and symbol of divine justice. News of her death spread across France, igniting anger and renewed determination. Soldiers and citizens alike began to see her not as a heretic, but as a holy warrior wrongfully slain. Her memory became a rallying cry, fueling the French resurgence that eventually drove the English from their lands and secured victory in the 100 Years' War. Decades later, the Church officially cleared her name, and in 1920, she was canonized as Saint Joan of Arc. Her death did not end her influence. It magnified it. Joan became more than a warrior. She became a symbol of faith, courage, and resistance against oppression. Her flame may have died in Rouen, but her spirit continues to burn in the heart of history. The assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. on April 4th, 1968, was one of the most heartbreaking moments in modern American history. A Baptist minister turned civil rights leader, King had become the moral voice of a generation, preaching peace, unity, and equality in the face of deep racial injustice. His philosophy of nonviolent resistance, inspired by Mahatma Gandhi, had already sparked monumental changes, including the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Yet, despite his message of peace, King faced hatred and violence at every turn. On that fateful evening in Memphis, Tennessee, as he stood on the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, a single gunshot ended his life. The echo of that shot was felt across the nation, a sound that shattered hearts but awakened a movement even stronger than before. King's death did not silence his dream. It amplified it. Across America, cities erupted in grief and anger, but his followers carried his message of peace forward. His assassination became a turning point for the civil rights movement, inspiring millions to continue fighting for justice, equality, and compassion. Within days, new laws were debated, and hearts were changed. His vision of a world where people are judged not by the color of their skin but by the content of their character became a guiding principle for generations. Over time, his legacy transcended borders, influencing global movements for human rights and freedom. In 1983, Martin Luther King Jr. Day was established as a national holiday in the United States, a testament that his dream still lives on. The bullet that took his life could not kill his message. His voice still echoes. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. On the night of April 14, 1865, America lost not just a president, but a symbol of unity and resilience. Abraham Lincoln. After 4 brutal years of the Civil War, the nation was finally beginning to heal. Lincoln, who had guided the Union through its darkest hour, had just witnessed the surrender of Confederate forces and dreamed of rebuilding a country torn apart by slavery and hatred. That fateful evening, he attended a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., seeking a brief moment of peace. But in the shadows lurked John Wilkes Booth, a Confederate sympathizer determined to avenge the South. As laughter filled the theater, a single gunshot echoed, striking Lincoln in the back of the head. The president who had fought for freedom and equality collapsed in silence, never regaining consciousness. By morning, Abraham Lincoln was dead, and America awoke to grief and uncertainty. Lincoln's death struck the nation like a thunderclap. At the very moment America needed healing, its greatest healer was gone. His assassination altered the course of Reconstruction, leaving leadership to those less compassionate and more vengeful. The dream of a just and united America faltered as racial tensions deepened and the promise of equality dimmed. Yet Lincoln's legacy endured. His words, "with malice toward none, with charity for all," became a moral compass for generations. He was mourned not just as a president, but as a martyr for freedom. His body was carried by train across the nation, as millions stood in silence along the tracks, weeping for a man they called the savior of the Union. Decades later, his vision for liberty and equality continued to shape American democracy, inspiring leaders from Frederick Douglass to Martin Luther King Jr. The man who freed the slaves and saved the Union may have fallen, but his spirit still defines the soul of America.
In March 1193, the world lost one of its most legendary leaders, Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known in the West as Saladin. The great Sultan of Egypt and Syria, Saladin had united the fractured Muslim world under a single banner and achieved what many thought impossible, reclaiming Jerusalem from the Crusaders in 1187. But unlike other conquerors, Saladin was revered not only for his victories, but for his mercy. Even his enemies, knights, kings, and chroniclers, spoke of his honor and chivalry. After years of warfare, he signed a truce with Richard the Lionheart, ushering in a rare moment of peace between East and West. Yet, as the sun set on his final days in Damascus, Saladin's body weakened from fever, his spirit heavy with the weight of empire. Surrounded by scholars and soldiers, he gave away his remaining wealth to the poor. The conqueror of Jerusalem died with barely enough to buy his own burial shroud, a final testament to humility in a world driven by power. Saladin's death left behind an empire vast but fragile. His sons and nephews, though noble in name, lacked his unifying strength and wisdom. Soon after his passing, the Ayyubid dynasty splintered, Egypt, Syria, and Mesopotamia divided by ambition and mistrust. The Crusader states, though weakened, found room to breathe again as Muslim unity dissolved. Yet Saladin's legacy endured far beyond borders and generations. To the Muslim world, he became the embodiment of justice, courage, and mercy, a ruler guided by faith, not vengeance. To the West, he was remembered as a noble adversary who honored his word even in victory. Centuries later, his name would still evoke respect in both mosques and castles. The man who united the crescent against the cross did not just fight for land, he fought for honor, compassion, and peace. In death, Saladin became greater than legend. He became a bridge between civilizations. In March 1603, the reign of one of history's most iconic monarchs came to an end, Queen Elizabeth I, the last of the Tudors. For 45 years, she had ruled England with unmatched intelligence, charisma, and resilience. Her era, the Elizabethan age, brought Shakespeare's words to the stage, Drake's ships across the oceans, and England's navy to triumph over the Spanish Armada. She was both adored and feared, a woman who defied the expectations of her time. Yet behind the crown and grandeur lay a queen burdened by solitude. She had never married, calling herself the Virgin Queen, wedded only to her kingdom. In her final days, frail and silent, Elizabeth sat by candlelight in Richmond Palace, surrounded by memories of those she had outlived, her counselors, her suitors, even her enemies. As dawn approached, she lay upon cushions on the floor, refusing her bed as though surrendering to fate on her own terms. When she finally passed, an age of glory faded with her, and an empire awaited its next chapter. Elizabeth's death was more than the passing of a monarch. It was the end of an era. With no heir of her own, the Tudor dynasty that had ruled for over a century came to a close. Power passed to her cousin James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England, uniting the crowns for the first time and giving birth to a new era, the Stuart monarchy. Though her reign had ended, her influence endured. Under Elizabeth, England transformed from a divided kingdom into a global power, its culture, language, and spirit forever changed. Even centuries later, she remains a symbol of strength, intellect, and independence. Her portraits still hang in halls of power, her words still echo in the pride of a nation she forged with courage and conviction. As the last Tudor was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey beside her rival sister Mary, the world turned a new page. But the legend of Gloriana, the queen who redefined what it meant to rule, would never die. History is not only written by the living, it is carved by the dying. From the fall of kings to the final breath of visionaries, each death reshaped the path of humanity. The world we know today stands upon the echoes of those moments, when empires shattered, revolutions ignited, and dreams refused to die. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand fell, the world plunged into war. When Genghis Khan died, his empire split and changed Asia forever. When Julius Caesar was struck down, a republic gave way to an empire. When Alexander the Great breathed his last, the world he conquered fractured into legend. From Lenin's passing, that birthed Stalin's rise, to Joan of Arc as flames that forged French victory, every death carried new life for history itself. The echoes continued with Martin Luther King Jr., whose fall gave strength to millions, and Abraham Lincoln, whose loss reshaped freedom's fate. Even Saladin and Queen Elizabeth I, and rulers divided by faith and continent, shared one truth. Their deaths ended eras, but their legacies outlived centuries. In the end, death is not an ending, it is a transformation. Every soul who changed history left behind a spark that shaped nations, beliefs, and destinies. And as we look back, one truth remains. History remembers not the moment of death, but the mark left behind. If you've traveled with us through time, through tragedy, triumph, and legacy, make sure to subscribe to Globe Mice, because this is just the beginning. More stories await, stories of power, courage, and the people whose last moments changed the world forever.